Greetings, amazing students. Welcome to this lecture for social problems. Welcome back. Thank you for tuning in. The focus for this week's lecture is going to be on immigration. And as I stated, in the last couple lectures that we've had, the way that our rotation has been is that we'll be starting off this lecture with a brief overview, again, kind of short and sweet to the point to give us enough of a baseline so that when we come back to class in our next session, we'll be able to pick up with this conversation and have some understanding related to immigration in this case. We're going to be talking about immigration in relation to social problems because this is a hotly contested, argued, passionate topic that we discuss in this country on several levels. As you know, in 2016, during the election, immigration in particular was a discussion that was held by all of those running for political offices during that time, particularly the office of the presidency and vice presidency. And in 2020, we saw the same thing. Historically, as we move backwards in time, immigration is also one of those political platforms that is heavily discussed and debated throughout politics, social circles, economic circles, legal circles as well. For that reason, I think it's important for us to be able to approach the topic of immigration well-informed while discussing some of the data and the policies around that, while also touching on the fact that we are talking about human lives, right? People who are leaving their countries of origin and making their way to another country. And what are some of the reasons, the motivation, the causality that leads an individual to take such a perilous journey in their life, right? And so we're going to be talking about all of that. But for today's focus for this lesson, what I'm going to be doing is giving you some context to immigration in general. We're going to keep it kind of high level today. I'm going to talk about some of the governmental definitions of immigration. We'll be familiar with some of the terms that the government uses to define what is an immigrant in the United States, what is a US citizen in the United States. We're going to look at some of those definitions. What we're going to do then is look at some light data involving immigration patterns to the United States, in the United States, for the past couple of decades. And then what we're going to end on is one particular program that facilitated, promoted the notion of immigration in the United States that existed here in Southern California. And what we're going to do then is that will give us sort of a foundation to work from to unpack this concept and this discussion on immigration a little more. All right. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with y'all, and we'll get diving into the content for today. Right. Try to keep this short and sweet and to the point for y'all. All right. So here's what we're going to do. Let's talk about first immigration and some terminology surrounding immigration. Now, the definitions, the terms that I'm going to be giving you here come directly from the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS's website, right? So I share this with you because I want you to understand that sometimes folks, when they're debating, when they're discussing the topic of immigration reform or policy or whatever have you, you'll hear individuals throwing out terms and they may not always be correct based on the definition. It's important, I think, to have a common understanding, use, a foundation of language that will assist us in all talking about one particular topic with as little confusion and misunderstanding as possible. So when you hear me referring to, let's say, a US citizen, we'll know exactly what that means per the definition in the United States of the IRS, right? When I talk about a US national or an illegal alien, whatever the case is, you understand where that terminology came from and what does it mean. So we'll talk about that here. Per the IRS, an alien is an individual who is not a US citizen or a US national. That's a broad term, right? So an alien is just referring to anyone who doesn't come, is not their origin, is not the United States or a US national, okay? A US national in particular is an individual who owes his or her sole allegiance to the United States, including, okay, all US citizens and some individuals who are not US citizens. So for tax purposes, the term US national refers to individuals who are born in America Samoa, okay, or who are born in the Commonwealth of North Mariana Islands who have chosen to be US nationals instead of citizens, okay? So what's a US citizen though? What is a US citizen? An individual who's born in the United States, or an individual whose parent is a US citizen. And note though that there are two general ways to obtain citizenship through your parents being citizens. One is at birth, okay, or one after birth, but before the age of 18, okay. So this may be for individuals who, let's say, are US citizens that are traveling for whatever reason and now have a child, all right, that's outside of that US area. Okay. A former alien could be a US citizen who has been naturalized in the United States, who has become a citizen. Okay. And it's important to also understand that individuals born in these areas of Puerto Rico, Guam, all right, and the US Virgin Islands are also considered US citizens. This is important to understand. I think that sometimes as a culture, we forget that, right? So it's important to understand. So immigration, okay, if we look at some of the terms here, an immigrant is an alien, remember, a non-US citizen or national who has been granted the right, okay, to reside permanently in the US and is to work without restrictions in the United States. So these are individuals then, if you notice, this doesn't mean all immigrants are illegal. In fact, an immigrant is legally here because they permitted to work without restrictions in the United States. So such individuals, an individual is also known as what we call a lawful permanent resident here in the United States. Okay, so this matters because when you are talking to individuals who are here legally, they're a lawful permanent resident, they will hear rhetoric of individuals in society saying immigrants. And there's a connotation sometimes, an assumption that's made by individuals that all immigrants are here illegally and all immigrants are potentially criminals or all immigrants are here to take jobs. No, some are here because they've applied and gone through a legal process where they've been permitted, legally allowed to work and to live here. That was endorsed by the United States government. So that's something to consider. So lawful permanent residents who are awaiting the issuance of their green card, which is that form that's used, all right, which is what you apply for your status here to be here legally to work and live, may bear this I-551 stamp on their foreign passport, still saying, hey, so we've permitted entry for you to be in this country, but we're just waiting for the paperwork to go through. So immigrant visas are available for aliens and their spouses and children of work who seek to immigrate based on their job skills. An alien who has the right of combination of skills, education, and work experience and is otherwise eligible may be able to live in the United States. It's important to note that each country may have their own laws for that. So let's consider then that, let's say I wanted to move to Canada. Canada is going to take a look at all of these factors, my skills, my education, my work experience, and they're going to say to what aspect, what degree can Dr. Mako contribute to the social structure of Canadian culture? And based on that, let me say, okay, I'm going to allow you, all right, a visa to come in so that you can stay here for X period of time, okay, in Canada and work. They're going to review all that. We do the same thing here. Now, an undocumented alien is an alien who entered the United States illegally without the prior authorization and documents, or who entered the United States legally and has since violated the terms of his or her visa and overstayed their time limit. So let's say someone was over here a lawful permanent resident, but they didn't reapply to continue to stay and work in the United States, and that paperwork expired. Their status now transitions over to an undocumented alien, okay? Now, and as we know, and as what we mostly hear in the media, undocumented alien also makes you eligible for deportation if you're apprehended, right? Or if the government chooses to go and find you to apprehend you, okay? So some people may say, well, Dr. Mako, then what is the difference between an undocumented alien, all right, and a refugee? What are the differences there? Well, refugee status is its own sort of category, okay? It's important to understand, and I'll delineate between refugee and asylum in a second here. So refugee status or asylum may be granted to people who have been persecuted, or listen to this, or fear they will be persecuted on account of race, religion, nationality, and or membership in a particular social group. There has to be a definition here, an established pattern or evidence of persecution or fear of persecution on account of these things: race, religion, and nationality, okay? Or let's say there's a social group that's being persecuted, right, in another country, and genocide and perhaps or mass killings are being implemented because they belong to that social group or that political group. That would be grounds for refugee status. But refugee status is really a form of protection that the US government would offer that may be granted to people who meet the definition of refugee as stated in the top there, or who are of special humanitarian concern. Refugees are generally people outside of their country who are unable and or unwilling to return home because of fear of serious harm. Now, it's important to understand here, and this is one of the things that's really important for us to understand. People will say, well, if someone's fleeing their country as an immigrant, why don't they apply for refugee status? Why do they choose to come here illegally, all right, and then enter the United States through one of our borders, primarily through the Mexico border, right? Well, it's important to understand there's a clause here that you may seek a referral for refugee status only from outside the United States. That little line there is potentially a huge issue. Picture that if you're in another country and you are being persecuted, like your life is in danger, people are trying to hunt you down or kill you because of your race, your religion, your nationality, or your political or social opinion, okay? And now you go to a governmental agency to say that I want to apply for refugee status, and you're not even here in the United States. If someone finds out that you've done that, your life is in immediate jeopardy, right? And so you've showed your cards, you've showed you're trying to escape that persecution. Those individuals, that system is going to try to hunt you down even faster. So what's important to note is that while refugee status exists, it's not feasible, it's not an action that everyone can take. Not everyone also has the means or the money to apply for this legal process. This is why so many individuals who are being threatened with their lives come from other countries and attempt to cross the border illegally without refugee status because they have no financial means or it's not safe for them to do so in their country of origin. Now, asylum, for example, asylum is a status, is a form of protection available to people when, different from a refugee, meet the first definition of refugee, are already in the United States and are seeking admission at a port of entry, okay? And you may apply for asylum in the United States regardless of your country of origin or your current immigration status. So this is really meant to be here. So you came here without letting us know first, but you still apply as a refugee. That this status applies to you, but you're already in the United States. The problem is you're not currently seeking admission in the port of entry. You've crossed the border illegally, right? So now you're here, but you're not in a port of entry. And that's a problem, right? For many individuals that are coming here trying to escape persecution, right? So I want to take a look really quickly at the US snapshot. So when people talk about immigration, we talk about immigration in this really heated context. And I think it's important to understand that we have to talk about the numbers, right, of individual that we're talking about when we talk about immigration, because we often, the way that the media and the news and our discussions demonstrate this is that it's this massive group of people. And it's an extremely large group of people, but we tend to make broad sweeping statements around things like immigrants, the volume of them and where they're coming from without really looking at the data. So I'd like for us to take a minute and let's look at our snapshot, our census of the United States. All right. Now, this was a snapshot of our census taken during the fiscal year of 2017. All right. This just tells us who was here in 2017. What was the amount of people in relation to the population of the United States? There were, okay, in 2017, 278.8 million native-born citizens in the United States. Native-born meaning born here in the United States, 278 million. There were 20.7 naturalized citizens. So these were individuals that were deemed as lawful permanent residents or aliens at the time who became naturalized, all right, and became US citizens, 20.7 million people. Legal non-citizens, people here for permanent residency or residency status, working, living here, 13.1 million, right? Now, this is what all the debate is about, obviously, that we talk about is 11.3 million unauthorized immigrants were in the United States in 2017. And then those on temporary visas, 1.7 million, very small number, right? Which made the total population 322 million. The total population I'd like us to look at is 322 million. And we're talking about 11.3 million, right, as unauthorized immigrants. Large number indeed. 11.3 million is not something to scoff at. But I would like us to consider for a moment, think about the amount of anger, hate, arguing, inhumane policies, broad stereotypes, divisive rhetoric that's used to describe a relatively small percentage of individuals, right, when compared to the total population. This response that we get around immigration is touchy, and it varies from one individual to the next. And it's often because we're talking about this issue is based on what we understand in our head without necessarily what we see in the data. And so I'd like to talk about this for a second. Much of the time when we talk about immigration, if you were to ask someone to associate a word with immigration, people are going to say Mexico. Mexico is often deemed as the primary source of immigration for the United States. There's this belief then that Mexico is the problem. And sometimes I hear this assumption spoken in circles that all of the immigrants coming to the United States are Mexican. That's not the case. That's quite really not the case at all. Mexico becomes a primary entry point for the United States because obviously it is connected to the United States. The border lies there. What's important to understand, though, is that not everyone who crosses the border illegally is coming from Mexico. I thought it would be helpful then to look at the immigration patterns, all right, on where individuals are coming from. And the data to this is not held in some quiet, secret place, a dark room that you have to know about and need a map to get there. This is posted right on the government's website related to immigration. This is all here, right? This is coming from the Office of Immigration. And so if we look at from 1960 to 2015, we'll see some interesting data telling a story of where the main source of immigrants has come from to the United States. Let's look at this, for example. In 1960, there were only 338,000 about immigrants coming from South or East Asia. Fast forward to 2015, that number jumped fantastically high to 12.1 million. Look at in 1960, only 575,000 individuals immigrated from Mexico. Fast forward to 2015, 11.6 million. I'd like to point something out for a second. Look at the numbers in 2015. There were more, by about 500,000 individuals coming from South or East Asia than Mexico. Yet in the discussion, the policy, the arguments, the hate, the rhetoric that exists out there, primarily what we portray in this country as an immigration problem is associated also as a Mexican problem. But that's not what the data tells us. Look at this, for example. Let's go to the Caribbean. I'm going to skip over Europe and Canada because I want to point something out in a second. In the Caribbean, 1960, 193,000. That jumped to 4.16 million. Central America, 48,000, almost 49,000 to 3.3 million. South America, look at the growth here. Almost 90,000 individuals, right, in 1960. In 2015, that number jumped to 2.9 million. The Middle East, 141 to 1.2 million. The Sub-Saharan African area, 13,000. Like, that's a very small number, jumping to 1.7 million. Folks, if we look at every single aspect of the world here that's recorded, except for Europe and Canada, what did we see in Europe and Canada? Less immigration, less individuals leaving the country from Europe and Canada, 8.2 million in 1960. That dropped to 5.6 million in 2015. Every other country, right, that we note on this chart is increasing its volume of individuals coming to the United States, except for Europe and Canada. I want to just point this out for a second because I think it's important for us to understand that sometimes when we get caught up in our ethnocentrism, when we get caught up in this notion of nationalism, we fail to see on a macro lens the problem that is occurring in this country, in this world, globally, I'm sorry. People look at this and they'll say immigration is a Mexican problem here in the United States. I would say that this is a global crisis. if we are looking at this as a country, one is there are individuals from all over the globe who exponentially are increasing the amount of people coming to this country. Why? For things that we talk about related to the American dream, for an opportunity to live in peace, to not be hunted down or slaughtered because of your political views, your social views, your ethnicity, your nationality, your religion, whatever the case is. Folks are looking for a stable income. They want to provide for their families. They want to be able to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But this isn't only individuals coming from Mexico. This is a global crisis. Instead of asking the question, why is it Mexico sends so many people to our country? Maybe we should be asking the question, why is it? What is occurring on a global scale that is causing individuals to leave their homelands, their countries, their homes in pursuit of a life? And what is it that the United States is offering? What would it look like? Right? If other countries around the world could offer something similar to their citizens where they don't want to leave, right? What is it that's going on in this world that's so disturbing that millions of people are leaving over a period of time, fleeing a place that they know is home, that they want to be home, but they don't see it as such because of all the unrest that's going on? That is the larger issue at play that's impacting the United States. Now, it's important to understand then that when we talk about refugees, I shared a lot of status about that. Why don't people just, apply for refugee status? Well, that's not really the norm, and that doesn't happen on a large level here in the United States. In 2018, there were only 22,000 refugees admitted to the United States, and we saw that was a 58% drop from 53,000 in 2017. In 1 year, the number of refugees dropped in that time. That's because here in the United States, we don't grant refugee status very often. So if you're a refugee coming for all of those reasons that we discussed, those intense reasons of genocide, war, poverty, starvation, and you're attempting to leave your country of origin, 22,000, right? Of how many people in the United States? What do we say? 322 million here, right? 13.1 million people applying for citizenship, and only 22,000 were granted citizenship. The odds of being granted refugee status isn't very great. So folks are going to need to take the risk to come to this country illegally because there's no time to wait for status. While you're waiting for your paperwork to clear, you may be murdered in your country if you don't take that risk. One more thing I want to talk about, and we'll end our lesson with today, is the Bracero program that existed right here in Southern California. The reason why I want to bring up this particular program, it is because it's important and it's relevant to our history here as a country. It's relevant to our history here in Riverside. But also when people talk about immigration, they talk about it as that we have had this long history of conservative views of immigration, and that we typically have been very, very deliberate about our immigration policy, which would be true, but not always as deliberate as people may think in terms of keeping people out. The United States has been very deliberate about also inviting individuals in legally to immigrate to the United States for reasons, usually economic, in this country. This is actually the largest labor agreement that was ever made in US history that I want to highlight because it also impacted our community here in Riverside. The pictures that exist here on the bottom, if you notice, you'll see Victoria Packing House in 1950, and all the pictures here of individuals working in the orange fields and packing, and this is the packing house in Victoria, on Victoria Avenue in Riverside. These are orange fields here in Riverside, not far from CBU. This area, this neighborhood, part of Riverside, is a historic neighborhood, second oldest barrio in California, next to Los Angeles, is referred to as Casablanca. Casablanca is a historic community that has roots to the Bracero program here that was enacted on part of the federal government. All of these pictures are individuals that lived in Casablanca, right down the street in Riverside on Madison Avenue. The Victoria Packing House still stands today. So I thought I'd share this with you because it relates to immigration. The Bracero program, when we talk about this particular program, refers to actually a series of laws and agreements on behalf of the United States and Mexico, which was enacted in 1942. We call it the Bracero program because in Spanish, brazo means arm. So when you talk about someone who you call them a bracero, that means that someone that does manual labor or works with their arms. Brazo, okay, bracero, someone that works with their arms. So what happened was in 1942, the United States signed the Mexican Farm Labor Agreement. That's what we refer to casually as the Bracero Program, the Farm Labor Agreement, okay, with Mexico. And what that did was, in World War II, we were putting all of our forces, right, our citizens' power, our resources towards World War II. That meant that young men were often going off and being recruited to fight. Women were also shifting their roles into the factories, building towards the war effort. Parachutes, supplies, clothing, tanks, all of that was being built, and primarily by women who are going to the factories to do this work. We found ourselves actually short in the labor department harvesting all of the crops that we needed internally as the United States and that we exported to other countries. So what happened was farmers had fields of oranges, of citrus, of produce, right? Nuts and berries that grow here in Southern California sitting, all right, and throughout the Southwest, and saying, we don't have any laborers to harvest these crops. They're all off to war. And if these crops are not harvested, right, that the consequences to the United States economy would be detrimental. And so the United States says, well, we need labor, we need cheap labor, and we need it quick. Where can we get it from? Eyes turned to Mexico, right? And so what happened was over the next 22 years, starting in 1942, over 4.6 million labor contracts were authorized, which allowed legal entry of Mexican citizens to come to the United States, to Canada, California, Southern California, and parts of the Southwest, okay? Arizona, Texas, things like this. There they were working to harvest those crops. They were legally permitted to be here. Now, it's important to note that when I say 4.6 million labor contracts, what that meant was individual agreements, 4.6 million people coming, all right, to places like Casablanca and Riverside to find work. Now, it's important to note then that this Bracero program, the Mexican Farm Labor Agreement, was the largest contract for labor, all right, in US history. It wasn't terminated until 1964. I want this for folks to just kind of gravitate on this for a second, right? The federal government asked for 4.6 million individuals to make their way from Mexico to Southern California and the Southwest to work. They were asked to be here, okay? They were recruited in some cases. What happens when you come and set up shop and do work here, right? So what happened was individuals came, some brought families, some only came by themselves. But what happened? You started working in the fields every day and you met someone that was really pretty and you had something in common with. And what happened? You got married and you had kids. And guess what? Your kids needed to go to school and your kids needed a place to live. And so you built a house. And so you started sending your kids to school and you said, I like the culture that's going on here. I like the food. I like the music, and I like my food and music. And I want to blend the two together. And I want to stay here in this country. And what happened? Many people that came to the United States under the Bracero program chose to stay because they liked it. Some people chose to stay because they were sent back across the border years ago under the agreement when Mexico became part of the United States and they no longer had citizenship, but that's another story. All right. And so what happened is that imported labor was granted under this agreement, which also offered decent living conditions, but that's contestable. We really know that that wasn't abided by for everyone, right? It was supposed to include things like sanitation, adequate shelter and food, and a minimum wage of 30 cents per hour. Now we know later that was heavily abused, right? Those rights weren't given to all of the workers that came here, which led to another social movement, right, of the farm laborers movement. But we'll talk about that at another time. And so the Bracero program, like I said, was later terminated in 1964. Folks, I wanted to point this out because it's important to understand that when we talk about immigration, the experiences of individuals can be very different. If you were to ask maybe someone in the Casablanca community about the negative rhetoric that's being used to describe Mexican individuals who come to the United States, they'll say, I'm really confused by that because my great-grandmother was asked to come here. She was asked to come, my great-grandfather was asked to come here to work in the fields. In fact, I'm the product of that. I'm a child of an immigrant family that was asked on behalf of the United States, signed a legal agreement to come here. But now, because you don't need the labor or you think you can get it from somewhere else, I'm not entitled to be here anymore. or I don't want anyone else to come across this border. So depending on who you ask, this is why you get this variance of results. We're going to end here with this just quick statement, something for you all to just kind of marinate on before we come back to our next discussion. Sometimes in the United States, we have this conversation about California in particular. There's this sort of mentality that exists that California is this extremely liberal state, and there's an assumption sometimes that we've always been that we haven't been this discriminatory state, that we've been a welcoming state, and that's not really the case. If you notice, the Bracero Program ended in 1964. What was happening then? The civil rights movement was also underway. It's important to know that California at that time was not this bubble of liberalism or acceptance in which everyone just got along and never disagreed with one another. In fact, California, segregation and racism was prevalent in this country, just between different social groups, depending on the makeup here in California due to the Bracero Program. What you saw was more Latinos living in California than African Americans. More Chinese living in California rather than African Americans, more Native Americans living in California. And as a result, discrimination, segregation still existed. It was just applied to a different group of individuals. Within the state of California, Mexicans were actually not allowed within certain public settings, such as restaurants or stores. Signs were posted banning, like this one here that's on the screen, dogs and Mexicans. And Mexican Mondays were implemented within some cities where public pools, where Mexicans were only allowed to swim on that day. And what would happen is after Monday, the pools would be drained, refilled, and then if you were white, you can come in and swim on all the other days of the week. Now, what's important to understand is these laws existed and they were relevant still here in Riverside. In parts of downtown Riverside, if you were Mexican, Chinese, or Native American, you were not allowed to purchase property in Riverside. That was actually the case in Sacramento too, in our state's capital, is that you could not purchase certain areas of land because you were of a particular race or ethnicity. In Riverside, from one of the pools, I think it was actually Tuesdays, was a swimming day for Mexicans, and that was the only day they could swim, and then the pool would be emptied and refilled and all that sort of thing. In addition to that, segregation existed within California. Here in Riverside, all right, schools within California were also segregated by race. So Mexican, Asian, Native Americans attended what were called specialized schools separate from white students. It wasn't until the 1960s with the desegregation of schools that individuals, children who had come or were products of the Bracero program, all right, were reintroduced into public schools for integration during that time. So I wanted to share this with you because I think sometimes in our minds, there's this understanding, we think of California as this inclusive environment. Well, there's still pockets of a lack of inclusivity and diversity within California, certainly, but that wasn't always the case either with when you look at the history of our state. So I thought that I would like to share that because this is something in which when we talk about immigration, we often think of it as just this sort of entry, right, of a flood of individuals who are coming here without permission. When we also I want to encourage you to think about immigration as historically as a country, we have actually opened the valve, right, and legally allowed, encouraged individuals to come to supply labor here, cheap labor, right, to boost our economy at the advantage of the United States economy, at the detriment of those who have come here. So just something to think about, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and end our lesson here for today. I am going to go ahead and set us up with our centering exercise for today, and we will pick up with this conversation when we return for our next class. Today's scripture verse will come to us from Luke chapter 9, verse 58. I'm just bringing up my timer here if my phone will wake up. There it goes. And our scripture verse says, "But Jesus replied, 'Foxes have dens to live in, and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place even to lay his head.'" Our word for today will be unite. So I'd like you for a second to go ahead and make sure your hands and feet are in a nice, comfortable position. As we continue this discussion on immigration and we explore immigration a little bit more, I'd ask us to consider this, right? That even the Son of Man wrestled with this notion of where do I belong, right? Because governmental agencies said I don't belong here, right? And this notion of what does it mean to unite? How is Jesus speaking unity into your heart today? So go ahead and take a nice deep breath, push out all of those worries, those concerns, those fears. Allow those to allow yourself to give those up to God, right? And let's just spend the next 2 minutes sitting quietly in God's presence. Let's just remember that God's with us in all of these conversations and all of these moments, no matter how difficult or challenging they seem, right? Go ahead and take a nice deep breath, close your eyes, and I'll keep track of the time. Okay, go ahead and take that nice deep breath. Open your eyes. Welcome back. Folks, it has been an absolute pleasure sharing this content with you. I look forward to our return and to our future discussions on the topic. If you need to get a hold of me, you know how to do that. Please be sure to check Blackboard for any updates, assignments, all of that good stuff related to our class. And I will see you all soon. Take care. Have a good one.